My name is Chaya Small. I was born in Pahust, but I was registered in Pinsk, Poland, in Pinsk, Belarus, because it was a big city, and I was born in a little shtetl. May 20th, 1934 is when I'm registered for. We were a total of 5 siblings. My family home, and that's one of the things that I'm very big about, is the home. The memories that I have and the strength that I have is what I saw at home on my Shabbos table. The ruchnius, the respect that I saw from my father to his wife, my mother, the respect I saw from my mother to the shiksel that was working in our house. My mother grew up always with somebody to help her. And this is something that is so important to me, that I look at the Shabbos table as a Beis Medrash Katan. And whatever happens, you young people, make sure that your home, that Shabbos table, is Kodesh. We lived in Poland. We had no intentions of leaving Poland. We also knew that we were in war with the Germans. But the Germans were the most sophisticated, the most cultured society. So the stories that we heard, we did not believe. We're not talking about today where you pick up your iPad and you know what's going on at the other end of the world. So we didn't believe those stories. But I remember a Russian Bolshevik who came over to my father at that time and said, Rabin, run. Rabbi, run. And my father took that to mean something. And that's when he took my family, my parents, my mother, and the children, brought them to my grandfather in Trab, and he went to Vilna to see, because he took his lesson as meaning something. Rabin, Rabbi, run. That was the encounter, positive. I focused always on positive. My grandfather in Pinsk was captured. I know he was in jail. I know he was beaten. I know that he was defiant. I know all that. Afterwards we went to Vilna. At that time, Vilna was neutral. That was Lithuania, before it was taken over by the Russians. By that time, we already had visas to go to Curacao via Japan, so we were on our way. My uncle who was there had a visa, but he couldn't leave because that time the Russians did not let him leave. I think it was in 1939 that we left Poland. We were in Vilna by my uncle, Reb Chaim. We left, we went to Japan. We were there in 1940. That was before Japan joined forces with the Germans. I'm trying to get the dates correctly. I don't want to make a mistake. And in 41, when Japan and Germany joined forces, we had to leave Japan. And because because Shanghai was under Japanese jurisdiction, the Japanese sent us to Shanghai. In Vilna, we lived with my uncle, Reb Chaim Volozhiner. He was the Rosh Yeshiva in Vilna. And we had a room also, but we mainly stayed with my uncle and his 2 daughters. From Vilna, we went to Moscow. From Moscow, we went to Vladivostok. In order to get to Curacao, we had to go to Vladivostok. We took a train in Moscow to go to Vladivostok. And what is the interesting part is the Russians allowed us to go to their borders. So we're talking of 5,000 miles going from Moscow to Vladivostok, all cramped in. Conditions were horrific, beyond horrific. Yet they gave us permission. So most people said, don't go, don't do it, because once you get on the train to Moscow, they'll take you to Siberia. If you end up in Siberia, you're finished. So my father said, I'd rather be finished at the other end than be finished there. And that was the whole Mir Yeshiva went on that same one. Because in Vilna, we got over 1,000 visas were issued by Sugihara, and that's the route we had to take. It was Sugihara, the Japanese envoy, the one who gave us the visas to go. And there were 3 people involved in that. Okay? The first person that was involved was Jean, who was from Curacao. And there was a loophole that we are able, the people who had any kind of, that we could go to Curacao. But in order to get to Curacao, we had to go to the whole Trans-Siberian Railroad to the end and get passage from Japan to Curacao, which is the Virgin Islands. And that was the thing. We were not going to Japan, we were not going to Shanghai, we were only going to Curacao. I live alone, I'm a widow now, but I make Shabbos every Shabbos. I give the food away, I don't eat it. I make challah, I make fish, I make chicken, and people come to get it, whoever wants. But Shabbos is Shabbos, and Shabbos, my house has to smell Shabbos. No carry-outs. My friend Carrie doesn't work for me. Nothing is carry-out. I work still, and when my clients come to me Friday, they know I am home. Oh, what smells so good? It's called Shabbos. We were there for a year. We would have stayed longer. The Japanese would have kept us longer. In 1941, when the Japanese and the Germans became allies, the order was to get rid of the Jews, and the order was to put us all on a boat and sink the boat in mid-air, in mid-ocean. Japanese didn't want to do it, and because they were ruling Shanghai, and there is a lot between the Japanese and the Chinese in Shanghai, we will not go there. They took us to Shanghai, and that's where that was our haven at that time. There was no anti-Semitism in Shanghai. The only part that was bad then in 41, that all the German Jews who were there before, who came in 37, 38, and 39, lived in the upscale areas. They had to go and live in the ghetto. The ghetto was the slum. The ghetto was the most debaucherated Unterwelt, I don't know the English word, Unterwelt, that you can imagine. And they went from living a normal, a luxurious life to scum. That was the hard part for them. In Shanghai, we went to the Kaduri School and the Shanghai Jewish School. I did have a tremendous education. We also had a Beis Yaakov. We lived in the ghetto, but when you think of ghetto, you remember the horrific ghettos of an Auschwitz. None of that happened to us in Shanghai. We had a community, we had freedom, we can go to school, we can go shopping, we had a home. It was poor. My mother had 1 pot, we had 3 spoons, two knives. There was not much of anything, but it was my home. We lived a normal life. It was a poor life. You can go to many countries here, many neighborhoods in New York City where people don't have food. People have no housing, people are homeless. But nobody bothered us.
Describe the day the war is over. The war is over, and describe that day. How were you feeling?
The boat were in the harbor. There was a lot of buzzing and running, and again, there's no news, okay? So you're just kind of isolated, and people are running all over. Did you hear the war's over? The war's not over, blah, 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 all that. It took about 3-4 days before the Americans were able to come into Shanghai. The liberation was different. It wasn't taking dead bodies out, it wasn't people in barracks. We had freedom to move around, and the celebration that the war was over.
In Shanghai?
It was in Shanghai, where it was awesome. But 3 days later, when they found out that most of the families were gone, all these young boys became orphans, parents had no more family. That was a day that was hushed. You knew you had to stay quiet. My father sat down for shiver when I said he was sitting on a bench. My mother was sitting on a bench all day, and I couldn't understand the mood because they didn't share with us or didn't tell us, we didn't know.
It was a happy day, it was a sad day.
It was a sad day. It was a sad day.
Sad day?
And the news bulletin that kept coming in, we would hang up on the posters outside, like in Yerushalayim, you go where the news. It was a very sad day. Where do you go? My father dedicated 5 years of his life to bring people to America on false papers, not false papers, sponsorship papers. Barton's Candy, I don't know if you've heard of Barton's Candy, Stephen Klein sponsored 350 people, if not more, to work in his factories. People who had to get jobs. Americans wanted to be sure that their sponsorship. I was sponsored, $5,400. I have the papers. We found it. Somebody guaranteed that I won't do anything. Getting people in. When we were leaving the boat, you heard nothing, but the whole community came out. And what were they singing? Ani Mamin. You hear that Ani Mamin on and on and on. There's nothing like listening to that. And slowly we got all the refugees out in jobs. The war did affect us, there's no question. Phobias, tremendous phobias. A uniform scared the daylights out of me. Whether I know they're not going to do anything to me, I know a policeman is not going to send me back anywhere, I'm a citizen. The fear of the uniform is unbearable. An alarm will go off, and I will go insane. I'll start screaming because it reminds me of the air raids. The reaction of fear that carries on to the children because of your phobias, you cannot get away from that. You just can't. Watching a child getting hysterical with doctors who were doing all kinds, yes. It affects me much more. It affected me much more because I look at it, there's a reason why Hashem saved us. You owe to give back. And there isn't a day that I don't say Shemona Esrei, and I thank God for the chasadim He has done to us. I cannot daven without verbally speaking to Him. I sound like thanking Him every single day. And I've gone through some hard things in life, like everybody else does. But thank you for the chasadim.
Did you always have emunah in Hashem throughout the war? You never?
Always. Why do I tell it? It's very interesting when you asked. I was working with Yad Vashem on a project about bullying. And after a while, a little girl came over to me and said, I want to become frum. I said, don't just be a mensch. That's good. Speak up. Don't be afraid. Speak up. Do the right thing. And don't be a lemming. You know what I mean by don't be a lemming?
Could you elaborate?
A lemming is following the crowd.
So be a
leader. Do the right thing. A man walk out, do the right thing. Never mind what your friends will say. If they can't respect you, they're not your friends. Remember that.
What would you say to your parents if you could speak to them now?
What I would say, that you gave us a diagram of how to live with what you went through. You gave us a map of how to be whole. We were young, we were little. You gave us a home that gave us so much greatness. And we didn't give up, you carried on, you picked up the pieces. Yavna, when Yavna was destroyed, you picked up the pieces and we rebuilt. And when I go back to Lakewood and I see Rishel Yeshiva and Rishel will say, Chaya mein Gold, look at the Melucha. We built from nothing. Look what we built up. You show me any of the other survivors who have built up except for themselves. But the yeshiva world, look what they have done.
So our mission is to continue what they started.
We build, we rebuild.